Let's now move to the second subsection of chapter 6, which is Middle Eastern coloniality, post colonial thought, and Marxism. Now, the author starts by telling us that post-colonial thought does not take the same challenging position when it comes to the Middle Eastern colonialism, wherein most of the colonizers professing Islam came from Central Asia. So, post-colonial thought, even though it criticizes the European colonialism that happened in India or Bharat after the 18th century, it does not take the same critical position when it comes to the Middle Eastern colonialism. And often in post-colonial thought, it's completely ignored. Now, the author has called Middle Eastern colonialism so because he has talked about Middle Eastern as a thought process and not as a geographical location. Just like when we talk about European colonialism or Western colonialism, it's not necessary that all of these countries have come from the West. It's more about the thought process and the idea behind it. Hence, even though it has come from geographically Central Asia, the author has referred to this form of colonialism as Middle Eastern colonialism. He tells us that the post-colonial thought does not acknowledge the similarities between the two onto-epistemological and theological systems, or in simple word, it does not acknowledge the similarity between Christianity and Islam. Now, herein the author gives us the similarities. Firstly, both talk about spreading of light either through force or inducement or both to the heathens or the non-believers. Both believe in the concept of true faith, and that true faith is that of having one singular God, which is God in Christianity or Allah in Islam. Also, both are non-indigenous and at loggerheads with indiquity system. So, for instance, they are extremely against indiquity system. For example, in indiquity system, we have multiple gods. We worship. There is a practice of worshipping and respecting nature, which is not the case with the OET systems of Christianity or Islam. Now, the author tells us that for Bharat to become truly decolonial and reclaim its Indic authority or its Indic system and its Indic roots, Bharat's version of decoloniality should encompass both the Middle Eastern colonialism as well as the European colonialism. He further strengthens this argument that how post-colonial school has corrupted the viewpoint by giving us the viewpoint of Marxist school of thought. And he tells us that Marxist school and post-colonial school in this regard have worked together to strengthen the argument of somehow ignoring Middle Eastern colonialism. He tells us that Marxist view is very similar to the post-colonial thought, and Marx, being Eurocentric himself, he believed that British colonialism was good for Bharat. He thought that British colonialism had a double mission. Firstly, annihilation of the old Asiatic society and the laying of the material foundation of Western society in Asia. Although he recognized the ills that the colonizers of British or Britain were doing, he felt it was necessary for it because he had this Eurocentric belief that science is the sole monopoly of the West and only they can use it to civilize India, and it is necessary for India to get civilized in that direction for any further revolution to happen. So he in a way justified the colonial process. Furthermore, both post-colonial school and Marxist school have harmed India's interest in this regard because both of them have acknowledged this fact that India's own interests were subservient to that of the colonial interests, and the thought process still is that of the colonizers rather than the Indic thought process. Herein, decolonial school becomes a better option according to author because it enables the movement of people towards their own cultural experience rather than completely accepting the cultural experience of the colonizers, be it the Middle Eastern or the European colonizers. Herein, the author substantiates his arguments by telling us about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his work on this regard in his book Pakistan or the Partition of India. Now, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in his books talks about how ever since the first invasion of Sindh by Muhammad bin Qasim in 711th century happened, There was a striking blow at the idolatry and polytheism of Hindus by the Islamic or the Middle Eastern colonizers. And establishing Islam in India was one of the primary aims of this expedition. Herein, he also tells us about how when the Middle Eastern rulers asked their Qazi or the religious preacher about the view of Hinduism according to Islam, the Qazi stated bluntly that either death or Islam is the way. They have to be converted to Islam, and they are not the proper followers of Allah. Hence, they have to convert to Islam, and they have to be taught the proper practices and the proper way of life. Also, while supporting the two nation theory, B.R. Ambedkar supported the two nation theory. He stated that it's a reality in his book. He talked about the successive invasions that happened in the northern India or the northwestern India. He talked about the successive invasion and growth of Islam, and he stated that it is so thick in northern India that the remnants of Hindu and Buddhist culture are just shrubs which are remaining. But the primary culture or the primary thought process has now shifted to Islam because of the successive invasions, and hence Pakistan is a reality that cannot be ignored. Pakistan, he stated, is politically detachable from, socially hostile, and spiritually alien to the rest of India. Hence, partition is unavoidable and it has to happen. Hence, we see even in the new day, there are two nations. India was divided into India and Pakistan. He gives us another example of a book by Venkat Dhulipa. The book is Creating a New Medina, State Power, Islam, and the Quest for Pakistan in Late Colonial North India. In this particular book, Dhulipa gives us the example of Maulana Shabir Ahmad Usmani, who was one of the founders of Jamia Millia Islamia University and a pro-Pakistan political party, Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam. Now, while he was giving his speech in Lahore in 1946, he stated that just as Medina provided a base for the eventual victory of Islam in Arabia, similarly, Pakistan would pave the way for the triumphal return of Islam as the ruling power over the entire subcontinent. Subcontinent here refers to India. And he stated that whole of Hindustan would turn into Pakistan. So according to him, Pakistan was like a new Medina that would be used to convert the whole of India into an Islamic state or Pakistan. Also, the author then tells us that even if we see the subsequent years' history after the creation of Pakistan between India and between Bharat and Pakistan, the number of political and violent movements which have surrounded Bharat in the name of Islam or in the name of Middle Eastern OIT have been extremely violent or political in nature, which have caused a lot of harm. And the author then concludes this particular chapter and this subsection of the book by telling us that Indic consciousness must thus protect itself from both the Middle Eastern colonizers and the European colonizers. And Middle Eastern colonizers have destroyed a part of India, and European colonizers had destroyed the way of life and thought processes. And if you use secularism as an argument against this or talk about fear mongering, he justifies himself by giving so many examples and then states that facts cannot be replaced with wishful secularized thinking. With that, we come to the end of the 6th chapter of this book.